The voicemail ended, and I just sat there in the cab of my truck with the engine ticking and my coffee going cold. My name is Renata Calloway. I'm 33, and that morning my dad had told me by voicemail that I was out of the family. I played it once. I didn't play it twice. His voice was flat, with something faint underneath it. I could hear Diane saying something I couldn't quite catch. "You're out. Don't come back. We're moving on without you." I stared at the phone for a long minute. Then I typed one word back. "Okay." What none of them remembered, while they were busy moving on without me, was who actually held the keys to everything they were standing on. By the next morning, there were 46 missed calls. I'll get to those. Welcome back to Revenge Stories, where quiet people keep receipts and a boundary lands harder than any shouting match ever could. If you've ever been the one holding the whole family together right up until they decided you were disposable, you'll want to hear how this one ends. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. So let me back up. I run a small bookkeeping and tax practice on Main Street in Clover Ridge, Ohio, population just under 4,000. I do payroll for the farm supply store, quarterly filings for 2 churches, and the books for half the farms in the county. People call me when the numbers stop adding up. When the IRS sends a letter that makes their hands sweat. When a son-in-law disappears with the equipment loan. I'm the one who reads the fine print out loud and slow. Turns out my own family had been a number that hadn't added up in a while. I learned this work the hard way. I was 20 when my mother got sick, and I left school to drive her to Columbus 3 days a week, 90 minutes each way, a thermos between us. I learned trusts and tax law at her kitchen table because somebody had to understand the paperwork, and the lawyers charged by the question. My mom's name was Helen. She had dirt under her nails and a head for figures, and she taught me that a ledger doesn't lie, even when people do. When the cancer came back the second time, she sat me down at that same table and made me trustee of the family trust. Not my dad. Me. The trust held the home place, 160 acres, and the farmhouse my great-grandfather built with his own hands. I didn't understand back then why she chose me over her own husband. I figured she was just being practical because I was the one who always read the documents twice. I'd find out exactly why she did it, but not for 2.5 years, and not until the morning everything came apart. My mother died on a Tuesday in October, and my father came undone in a way I wasn't ready for. Gerald Calloway had been married to her for 36 years. He didn't know how to make coffee. He didn't know which bills were on autopay or where she kept the spare key. For about a year, I drove the 12 miles out to the farm every other day just to keep him upright. I balanced his checkbook. I refilled his prescriptions. I sat with him through the suppers that were hardest, the holidays, her birthday. I told myself this was what daughters did. And I didn't mind, because under all that grief, he was still my dad. Near the end, Mom had told me her worst fear wasn't dying. It was leaving him behind, soft-hearted and alone, because she said a lonely man with land is a target, and she wouldn't be there to stand between him and the wrong person. I thought she was just tired and rambling. Then he met Diane at a church potluck 2 counties over. They married 13 months after the funeral. It happened so fast the neighbors hadn't finished dropping off casseroles. Diane Voss was 54, twice divorced, sharp-eyed and friendly in the way of people who are always counting the exits. She moved into the farmhouse, and her grown son Kyle moved in 3 weeks after that into my old bedroom, with his truck parts on the porch. I tried to be glad. I really did. A lonely man had someone again, and that should have been a good thing. but something curdled in my dad that first winter, and it took me a while to name it. He'd started saying things like, "Your mother left the place to you and not me." Like I'm a renter on my own farm. He said it lightly, the way you say a thing you've been chewing on for months. Diane never argued with him when he said it. She just nodded slow and let it sit in the room. I'd catch her watching me when I came over with the quarterly statements. Not unkind, exactly. Just measuring. I should have measured back. The house in town was Diane's idea, and by spring it had a name and a number, a 4-bedroom on Birch Street asking $240,000, with a porch she said reminded her of her childhood. They wanted to sell the back 40 to pay for it. The back 40 wasn't theirs to sell. It belonged to the trust, which meant it belonged, in a legal sense, to my mother's wishes, and I was the one holding the pen. I didn't want to fight. So I bent. I offered to put $60,000 of my own money toward the down payment, a gift, no strings, just to make the math work without touching the land. And I told them I'd look seriously at a partial sale of the acreage if we did it properly, an appraisal, a notice to the other beneficiary, a sit-down with the trust attorney. That's not me being difficult. That's just how you avoid getting sued later. I even called Patrice Holman, the lawyer who had helped Mom set the whole thing up, and asked her to begin the paperwork the right way. Diane didn't hear yes, carefully. She heard delay. One evening over pot roast, she set a stack of papers beside my plate and said, "Smooth as butter, your mother's gone, honey. This is our family now." My dad studied his fork. Kyle smirked into his phone. I felt the temperature in that kitchen drop 10 degrees, and I understood for the first time that to them, my signature wasn't a safeguard. It was a formality they expected me to perform, like passing the rolls. The trouble was, I'd read the trust 100 times. I'd read it the night my mother signed it and a dozen nights since. A formality was the one thing it would never be. It came to a head over that pot roast, 2 weeks before their closing date. They'd already put $15,000 down in earnest money. I didn't know that yet. Diane slid the sale agreement across the table and tapped the signature line with one polished nail. "We just need you to sign here," she said. "The closing's the 18th. My dad finally looked up. "It's all arranged." Warrendale drew it up. Warrendale, my father's golf buddy of 20 years who happened to have a law license. I kept my voice even. "I can't sign this tonight." Diane's smile didn't move. "Why on earth not?" "Because it's trust land," I said. "There's a process, an appraisal, notice to the beneficiaries, a real valuation. I'm not allowed to just sign it away because it's convenient. And honestly, neither of us wants me to." I looked at my dad when I said it. He was the other beneficiary. I was protecting him too, whether he could see it or not. The kitchen went quiet except for the clock over the stove. Kyle muttered something about me thinking I was better than everybody. Diane set down her fork. "So you're going to hold up your father's whole life over paperwork?" "Over my mother's instructions," I said. "It's not the same thing." My dad's jaw worked. He didn't say anything. That was the part that hollowed me out. Not the anger. The silence. I kept the pen and set it down beside her stack of papers. "Thank you for dinner." Then I drove the 12 miles back to town, headlights cutting across empty county road, and I didn't cry because crying wasn't going to balance anyone's books. I just kept thinking about how a man can sit at his own table and decide without a single word which side he's on. He called the next morning at 6:40, while I was parked outside my own shop with the lights still off inside. I didn't pick up in time, so it went to voicemail. And that's the message I told you about at the start. I want you to hear it the way I heard it. Cold in a truck, before coffee. Renata, we talked it over. You're out. Don't come back. We're moving on without you. And then, faint, almost swallowed, Diane in the background. Tell her about the trust. A pause. My dad's voice again, lower. We'll deal with the trust. Click. I sat with my thumb over the screen. There's a particular kind of still that comes over you when a person you love hands you something you can never unreceive. I didn't shake. I didn't get loud. I read his words back in my head the way I read a tax notice, looking for what it actually said under what it meant to scare. We'll deal with the trust. As if it were theirs to deal with. I typed one word, the only honest word I had. Okay. I read it back once before I sent it, and I'll be straight with you. It wasn't surrender. People hear okay and think it means giving up. Mine meant the opposite. It meant I was done spending my own life propping up people who had just told me on a recording I'd keep forever that I wasn't family. For 30 months, I'd been bending so the family wouldn't break. That morning, they broke it themselves with a phone call before the sun was all the way up. So I stopped holding. And the first thing a person does when she finally stops holding something that heavy is set it down. I just happened to be holding more than they realized. Here's what I did before lunch, and every bit of it was mine to do. First, the $60,000. That was my money sitting in my savings, promised as a gift toward a house I was no longer welcome in. The deal hadn't closed. A gift you haven't given is still yours. I emailed Warrendale one clean sentence. Please be advised I am withdrawing my offered down payment contribution effective immediately. Then I called my bank and confirmed not a dollar had moved. Second, the trust. As trustee, I wasn't going to be rushed into selling the back 40 under a closing deadline I'd never agreed to. So I did the opposite of rushing. I started the process correctly. I formally initiated the appraisal. I logged the request. I sent the file. And I declined to authorize any sale until that process was complete. That's not a weapon. That's a trustee doing her actual job, the slow and careful way the law expects. But to people counting on my speed, slow lands like a slammed door. Trust locked. Not out of spite. Locked the way a vault is locked when the person responsible for it finally stops being talked into leaving it open. The house deal on life support. Because without my $60,000 and without trust money, the numbers on Birch Street did not add up, and they never had. I want to be honest about the feeling. It wasn't triumphant. It was quiet and a little cold, like the first hard frost after a long warm fall, the one that finally kills the thing you've been nursing all season. I closed my laptop. I unlocked the shop and turned the sign to open. I made the coffee I'd let go cold. I had a farm supply payroll due by 3. And life, unlike family, keeps its appointments. I'd put my phone on silent to run payroll. When I flipped it over after, the screen looked like a slot machine that had stopped on bad news. 46 missed calls. 31 from my dad. 9 from a number I didn't recognize. The rest from Diane. And one text from Warrendale, sent at 9:52 that morning. I read it standing at the counter with a client's tax form still in my hand. Renata, we have a serious problem. Call me before you do anything else. I set the phone face down on the counter. A serious problem. He wasn't wrong exactly. He just had the ownership of it backward. A man who tells his daughter not to come back 12 hours before he needs her $60,000 and her signature to close on a house, that man has a serious problem. It's just not the problem he thinks it is, and it definitely isn't mine. I finished Mrs. Albright's tax forms. I double-checked her withholding and clipped the copies. I walked her to the door and told her to say hi to her grandkids. Then I poured a second cup of coffee and looked at that text again, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 2.5 years. I felt like I could breathe all the way down to the bottom. 46 calls in 3 hours. They discovered all at once how much of their entire plan had been resting on a person they'd thrown out at dawn. I scrolled the call log once, top to bottom, the way you scan a column for the entry that's throwing everything off. There it was, the timestamps marching down the screen. Panic in numbers, which is the only language I really trust. I didn't call Warren back. I wasn't going to do anything else, not the way he meant it. I was going to do exactly one thing first, and it wasn't going to be on his timeline. The one thing I did was call my own lawyer. Not Warren. Warren was my father's man, paid by my father, looking out for my father. And there is nothing wrong with that, except people in Clover Ridge have a habit of forgetting whose lawyer is whose. Patrice Holman had drawn up my mother's trust in the back room of a converted grain mill, with Mom signing in blue ink and laughing about how official it all felt. Patrice was 60, gray-braided and allergic to nonsense. I drove over and laid it out plain. The dinner. The voicemail. The $60,000 I'd pulled. The appraisal I'd initiated. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than you'd think in a lawyer. When I finished, she folded her hands. "Let me tell you where you stand," she said. "The money was yours. You can give a gift or not give a gift right up until it leaves your account. Nobody can force you." She tapped the trust binder. "And as trustee, you are not only allowed to refuse a rushed sale, you are required to handle it carefully. That's the job. A court won't second-guess you for following the document and your mother's intent." Then she paused, and something crossed her face. Not worry. More like memory. "There's something else," she said. "Your mother left a sealed side letter with the firm when she signed the trust. Her own written instructions, signed and dated, telling us to release it to you only if a dispute ever came up over the land." She looked at me over her glasses. "It looks like there's a fight over the land." My mouth went dry. "What's in it?" "I never opened it," Patrice said. "Carol's, Helen's handwriting on the front. Just your name." She slid it across the desk, and I didn't pick it up. "Not yet. I'll come back to that letter, because I didn't open it that day. And you'll see why it mattered that I waited. First, Diane came to my shop. She did it on a Friday at lunch, when she knew the place would be full. The bell over the door jingled, and there she was in a coat too nice for our town, raising her voice before she'd even reached the counter. "Well, here she is," she announced to the room. "The daughter who abandoned her grieving father over a piece of dirt." 3 of my clients were sitting in the waiting chairs. The farm supply manager. 2 ladies from the Methodist church. Every one of them stopped pretending not to listen. "Hi, Diane," I said. "Can I help you with something?" "You can sign the papers, is what you can do." She planted herself in the middle of my shop. "You're tearing this family apart. Your mother would be ashamed of you. This is our family now, and you're shutting us out of our own home." There it was again. That line. The one she liked best. I came around the counter slowly and held the door open for her. "I've got clients," I said. "If you'd like to talk, Patrice Holman can set up a meeting with the lawyers present." Her face went blotchy. She swept out, and the bell jingled behind her like nothing had happened. I turned back to my waiting room. Mrs. Tatum, who'd buried 2 husbands and feared no one, looked at me and said, "Your mama would not be ashamed of you, baby. She'd be proud." Small towns talk. I let them. By Sunday, half the county had heard Diane's version. By Monday, the other half had heard Mrs. Tatum's. My dad's calls changed shape after that. He stopped demanding and started grieving at me, which is harder to hold a line against. He left a voicemail Sunday night, and his voice cracked in the middle of it. "You're killing this family, Renata. Your mother would be ashamed. We raised you better than to turn your back on your own dad." I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets and listened to it twice. I'm not going to lie to you and say it bounced off. It didn't. There is no part of you so well defended that your father saying your dead mother would be ashamed of you doesn't find a soft spot and press. I wanted to call him back. I wanted to fix it the way I'd fixed every broken thing in that family since I was 20. But I'd learned something running other people's books for 10 years. When your hands are shaking, you don't make the entry from memory. You go to the source document. So I didn't call. I got up off the floor, pulled out the trust, and read again in my mother's plain language exactly what my job was. It steadied me better than any pep talk could have. I wasn't being cruel. I was being correct. Those are different things, no matter how loud someone insists they're the same. I texted my dad one line and only one, "I love you." I'm still following Mom's trust. He didn't answer. I know that feeling, when the people who hurt you flip it around and call you the cruel one. If you've ever been guilt for finally holding a line, this story is for you. Stay with me. The part where it turns is coming. Hit subscribe so you don't lose the ending. While I was holding my line, their whole plan was quietly catching fire. And I want to be fair about how it happened. Without my $60,000 and without any trust money, my dad and Diane were short, badly short, on a house they had already promised to buy. The sellers, a retired couple moving to Florida, had a backup offer and no patience. Their agent sent Warren a letter, close on the 18th as agreed, or forfeit the $15,000 in earnest money and face a claim for their costs. $15,000. My dad didn't have $15,000 lying around. Almost none of it had ever been his money. It was supposed to be the land's money, and mine. I heard the worst of it from Aunt Louise, my mother's younger sister, who still drove out to check on Gerald because that's the kind of woman she is. "He's not sleeping," she told me on the phone. "Sits on the porch half the night with the radio off. Diane's at him all day about where the money went. And Kyle's no help, just eats and complains." I felt it then, that pull, the one that had run my life for 30 months. He was my father and he was suffering and I had a checkbook. But here's the thing I finally understood, sitting at my own kitchen table with my own coffee. I hadn't caused this. They had spent money that was never theirs on a promise they'd extracted from a person they then threw away at 6 in the morning. A frost doesn't kill a healthy plant. It only finishes what was already too tender to make it. I told Aunt Louise I loved her and I loved him, and I was still not going to sign. She was quiet a second. Then she said, "Good." And she meant it. Patrice called me on a Wednesday and asked me to come read the letter. I'd been avoiding it, and she knew it. You don't have to, she said. But Helen wrote it for exactly this. Seems a shame to leave her talking to an empty room. I drove over after I closed the shop. The letter sat on her desk where she'd left it, a plain white envelope gone soft at the corners from sitting in a file for 4 years. My name on the front in my mother's slanted, careful hand. The same handwriting that used to show up on my lunch bags and my report cards and later on the legal pad where she worked out who should get what when she was gone. I picked it up and didn't open it. Why did she think there'd be a fight? I asked. Patrice took off her glasses. Your mother was sick, not blind. She knew your father. She loved him, and she knew exactly what he'd do if he got lonely and somebody got in his ear. She nodded at the envelope. She wasn't protecting the land from him. She was protecting him from himself. And she picked you to do it. My mother had been dead 2.5 years. She still wasn't done talking. I sat down in the chair across from Patrice, the chair my mother had signed her trust in, and I turned the envelope over in my hands a few more times. Outside, the streetlights came on along Main. I thought about all the people who had told me that month what my mother would or wouldn't think of me. Diane. My dad. Half the church. Now here was Mom herself, in her own hand, about to weigh in. My thumb found the seal. I opened it slowly, the way you peel a bandage you know is stuck. 1 page, both sides, blue ink. She started the way she always did. No fuss. Renata Bug, if Patrice is giving you this, then it's happened. And I'm sorry I'm not there to take the heat with you. I had to stop and breathe before I could go on. Then she told me why. I didn't make you trustee because you're the smart one, though you are. I made you trustee because you're the only one in this family who can say no to your father and still love him in the same breath. He can't say no to himself. He never could. Someday somebody's going to come along and want this land turned into cash. And they'll get to him when he's weak. And he'll convince himself it's what we all want. It won't be. There's something I never told you, Renata. My own mother lost her daddy's farm exactly this way. A second husband, a sweet smile, a deed signed at a kitchen table before anybody could stop it. I was 9. We rented rooms after that. And she grieved that ground until the day she died. I made you trustee so you'd be the one standing where nobody stood for her. Keep the place whole, baby. Not for the dirt. For the next people who'll need somewhere that didn't get sold off in a bad season. And then, listen to me, her handwriting pressed harder here, the way it did when she meant a thing all the way down. The day they tell you you're not family, that's the day you'll know I was right to pick you. Family doesn't put you out for doing the job they trusted you with. So don't you dare feel guilty. You're not the one who left. I read it 3 times. I sat in that chair and I didn't make a sound, but something that had been crouched in my chest for 30 months stood all the way up and walked out. I never knew about my grandmother's farm. She'd carried that loss her whole life and never once said it out loud. She'd been afraid of this for years. Not the exact morning, she was no fortune teller, but the shape of it, because she'd watched it happen once before to her own mother and swore it would never happen twice. She hadn't been practical when she chose me. She'd been handing me a backbone and a reason, and only now did I understand the size of both. I folded the letter and put it in my breast pocket, over my heart, where I could feel the edge of it. Okay, Mom, I said. This time the word meant something brand new. With the letter in my pocket, I finally let Patrice translate Warren's serious problem into plain English. She read his texts and his one stiff letter and almost laughed. "He's blowing smoke," she said. "Listen to what he's actually claiming. He says you interfered with the purchase and you might be liable as trustee." Both wrong. She held up one finger. The $60,000 was a personal gift you hadn't yet made. You can't interfere with a sale by declining to hand over your own money. That's not interference. That's just keeping your money. A second finger. And as trustee, declining to rush a sale of trust property while you follow the appraisal process your mother's document requires? That's not a breach. That's the opposite. You'd be in trouble if you'd signed it away in a weekend to make your dad's wife happy. She set the letter down. The serious problem, Renata, is that Warren let his client sign a purchase contract spending money that wasn't his and wasn't promised in writing. That's a problem. It's just Warren's client's problem, and Warren's malpractice carrier's problem, if he's not careful, and not one bit yours. I thought about that for a second. So when he says we have a serious problem, he means they do? Patrice nodded. And he's hoping you don't know the difference, so you'll panic and sign to make it all go away. I'd spent 10 years watching people try to make a number disappear by saying it confidently. It never works. Numbers don't care how sure your voice is. Neither, it turns out, does a trust document. I told Patrice to send Warren a short reply on my behalf. 3 lines, no heat. It said I had nothing to discuss outside a properly noticed meeting with counsel present, and that my position was simply that I was following the trust. A thing like this doesn't stay between 4 people in a small town. It spread through the whole family like a crack running through a windshield. Aunt Louise was with me from the first day, loud about it, which helped more than she knew. She showed up at my shop with a thermos of coffee and a casserole and a memory. "You know your mama planted those oaks along the back 40 the year you were born," she said. "One for you." She'd come back from chemo too tired to stand and still ask if anybody had watered them. She set the casserole on my counter. "Your mother didn't hand you that land, Renata. She handed you a backbone. So use it." On the other side, my Uncle Ray, half the county shares that name, ours included, called to tell me I was breaking my father's heart and that blood was thicker than paperwork. I told him blood was exactly why I was being careful, and he hung up on me. The Methodist ladies divided right down the middle of the fellowship hall. It would have been funny if it hadn't been my life. But here's what I noticed, standing in the middle of all that talk, the people who knew my mother best, who'd watched her work that land and fight that disease, those people landed on my side without me asking. The ones who'd only heard Diane's version landed on hers. Truth has a long memory in a small place. People who'd known Helen Calloway 30 years were not about to believe she'd raised a daughter who'd put her own father out in the cold for spite. They knew better. They'd known her. And they were about to find out exactly how much like her I'd turned out to be. When the guilt didn't work and the gossip didn't work, they reached for the only lever they had left. Warrendale sent a letter on actual letterhead, the kind meant to make your stomach drop. It said my father intended to petition the court to remove me as trustee for breach of fiduciary duty and acting against the interests of the beneficiaries. Kyle took a picture of it and posted it on his Facebook with the caption, "Getting our land back." Some people forget who family is. 40 likes. A cousin commented a row of clapping hands. I read the letter twice, and I'll admit my pulse picked up, because the word court does that to a person, even when you're in the right. So I did what I'd trained myself to do. I took it straight to Patrice. She read it slower than the last one, then put it down and looked at me with something close to satisfaction. "Now they've actually shown us their hand," she said. "This is good for you." "It doesn't feel good." "Feelings aren't filings." She said, "Sit down. Let me tell you how removing a trustee actually works, because it is nothing like how Warren's letter wants you to feel it works." I sat. Outside, a truck rumbled past hauling somebody's seed corn. I had the strangest, steadiest feeling, like I'd been walking on river ice for a month and had just felt my boot hit solid ground underneath. Quick one before it turns. If you've ever been told you're tearing the family apart for refusing to be the family's doormat, comment boundaries so I know you're out there. Then stick around, because what happens at that lawyer's table is the whole reason I made this video. Subscribe so it finds you. To remove a trustee, Patrice said, you go to court and you prove cause, real cause, bad faith, self-dealing, wasting the assets, ignoring the document. She ticked them off on her fingers. Now you tell me, Renata, did you take a dime of trust money for yourself? No. Did you sell anything, lose anything, hide anything? No. Did you follow your mother's instrument and order a proper appraisal? Yes. She spread her hands. Then there's nothing to remove you for. Anyone can file a petition, that part's cheap, and your father's free to try. Winning one is a different animal. No judge is going to remove a trustee for being careful. He's going to wonder why the petitioners are in such a hurry to sell land that isn't even theirs. She leaned back. Here's the part Warren is banking on you not understanding. The earnest money, the $15,000 they're about to lose, that exposure exists because they signed a contract relying on funds that were never committed in writing. That's on them. You declining a gift and following a process didn't create their problem. Their problem was baked in the day they spent money they didn't have. It landed clean, the way a column finally balances after you've hunted the error for an hour. The whole month I'd been carrying this low dread that maybe, somehow, I was the one in the wrong. That maybe a daughter who won't sign really is the villain of the story. Patrice had just shown me the ledger, and my side balanced. Theirs didn't. So what do? I asked. You offer them a fair way out, she said. On the record. Not because you owe them, but because it's right. And because when they turn it down, and they will, there will be no doubt left in this county about who was reasonable. I liked that. It sounded like something my mother would have done. So I offered them a fair path in writing, through Patrice. I want you to hear it, because this is the part people skip when they tell a revenge story, and it's the part that matters most. I didn't want to ruin my father. I wrote that I would consider a partial sale of the acreage, not the home place, not my mother's oaks, but a defined back parcel at a proper appraised value, with the proceeds handled through the trust the way the document required. I wrote that some of those proceeds could go towards suitable housing for my father, because supporting him was actually within my discretion when it was done right. I asked for exactly two things in return. 1, a real appraisal. No rushing. 2, that the talk about putting me out of the family and removing me as trustee stop today, because you cannot expel someone in the morning and demand her cooperation by night. That's not a condition. That's just how reality works. Patrice sent it over. We heard back in a day. The answer came from Diane, not my dad. And it came through Warren. And it was no. Not a counteroffer. Not let's talk. Just no. Warren wrote that his clients would not accept conditions dictated by Miss Calloway. Conditions. I'd offered to fund my father's housing and a fair appraisal. And the only condition they couldn't stomach was being asked to stop telling people I wasn't family. That told me everything. This was never really about the land, or even the money. It was about whether I'd kneel. I read the rejection twice, and instead of the dread I'd carried all month, I felt almost light, because now I knew for certain that I'd done right by everyone, including them, and they'd said no to right. Warren called the meeting himself, 3 days before the closing date he was about to blow. He framed it as a chance to resolve everything before this gets out of hand, which is lawyer form. My client is about to lose $15,000 and I need you in a room. He said it at his own office, on his own turf, Thursday at 10. I think he pictured me walking in scared and alone, ready to sign anything to make the noise stop. I told Patrice yes. Then I told her I wanted her beside me. I wanted us 5 minutes early, not late, and I wanted the file in order. You don't have to go at all, Patrice reminded me. There's nothing legally requiring it. I know, I said. But I want to. And I did, for a reason I couldn't quite say out loud yet. Some part of me needed to sit in a room with all of them, with the lights on and witnesses present, and let the truth stand up by itself, without anyone yelling it. I'd spent 30 months managing this family in private. Quiet phone calls. Careful texts. Signatures on kitchen tables. Just once I wanted it said in the open, on the record, where it couldn't be twisted into a different story by Sunday. They'd built this whole thing on the assumption that I'd never make them say it to my face, that I was too soft, too loyal, too afraid of being the bad daughter. They set the table for a girl like that. They just forgot whose name was on the deed underneath it. I laid out my best blazer Wednesday night. The navy one. Then I made sure my mother's letter was still in the breast pocket. It was. My dad called the night before the meeting, late, near 11. I almost didn't answer. I did, because he was still my dad, and because some doors you keep a hand on even when you've decided not to walk through them. Renata, he said. His voice was wrecked. I don't know how we got here. For a second, it was just him, the man who taught me to drive a stick shift in the church parking lot. The man who cried at my mother's grave until Aunt Louise had to walk him to the car. I miss your mother every single day, he said, and his breath hitched. I just need this to close. Please. And God help me, I felt it. The grief underneath the anger was real. He wasn't a monster. He was a lonely man who'd let someone steer him off a cliff and was only now feeling the air go by. I almost softened all the way through. Then he kept talking. If you'd just signed it the first time, he said, and the wreckage in his voice firmed into something older and meaner, none of this would be happening. You did this, Renata. You put us here. And there it was, not an apology, but a bill made out to me for a debt that was his. He'd reached for the soft place, found it, and pressed. Same as the voicemail, just slower. I closed my eyes. I love you, Dad, I said. I'll see you at 10. I hung up before he could find the next soft place. I sat in the dark a long while with the letter in my hand. Then I hung the blazer on the door and went to bed. And I slept better than I had in a month. I want to tell you what calm actually is, because people get it wrong. They think calm is when nothing's wrong. It isn't. Calm is what's left when you've already decided. Thursday morning I got up early and built my file the way I build every file for a hard meeting. Clean, ordered, no surprises for me to fumble. The trust instrument, tabbed. The appraisal notice, dated. My one-sentence email withdrawing the $60,000, with the timestamp showing it came before any closing. Patrice's plain language summary of the law. And in my breast pocket, not in the file, my mother's letter. Because that one wasn't evidence for a lawyer. It was ballast for me. I wasn't bringing it to read aloud. I was bringing it so my hands would stay still. I made coffee and didn't drink it. I checked the file twice, then a third time, the way Mom used to check the truck's oil before a long drive. Not because she doubted it, but because checking was how she said a prayer. I looked at myself in the hall mirror, navy blazer, no makeup to speak of, the same face that does payroll for the farm supply store, and I said out loud to nobody, "You're not going there to win. You're going there to be done. It's a different errand. Winning is loud and needs an audience and never quite fills you up. Being done is quiet and only needs the truth and a door you can walk out of." I'd been trying to win my family back for 2.5 years, one favor at a time. That Thursday, I wasn't going to win anything. I was going to set the whole heavy thing down on Warrendale's conference table in front of witnesses and walk out lighter. I picked up my keys. The drive to his office was 4 minutes. I made every one of them count. Warren's conference room had a long table that was trying too hard, dark wood polish to a shine, a bowl of mince nobody ever ate. When Patrice and I walked in at 5 till 10, the room was already fuller than I expected, and I understood at once that Warren had stacked it. My father sat at the far end, smaller than I remembered, hands flat on the table. Diane sat beside him in a red blazer, chin up, eyes already hot. Kyle slouched against the wall with his arms crossed, there for the show. Warren sat at the head, reading glasses down his nose, a thick folder squared in front of him. And 2 people I hadn't expected, a young man from the bank in a gray suit, the loan officer, and a brisk woman with a leather portfolio who turned out to be the seller's agent. I clocked them in a second and felt something settle in me, because Warren had made a mistake. He'd brought witnesses. He'd thought he was bringing pressure. What he'd actually done was guarantee that whatever got said in this room got said in front of people with no reason to lie about it later. I sat where Patrice pointed, halfway down, where I could see everyone. The ceiling fan turned slow. Somewhere a clock ticked. Diane stared at me the way she'd stared across the pot roast dinner, measuring. My dad wouldn't look at me at all. Warren cleared his throat the way men do when they want the room to know they're in charge of it. "Well," he said, opening his folder, "let's see if we can talk some sense into things." He looked over his glasses at me, not at Patrice, at me. "The way you look at the weakest seat at the table. Renata," he said, "you've created quite a situation." He laid it out like a closing argument to a jury he was sure was already his. "Let's be clear about what's happened here," Warren said, sliding a stapled document across the table toward me. "Your father and Diane entered a binding agreement in good faith. You, as trustee, undermined that agreement. You withdrew a committed contribution at the 11th hour. You've exposed this family to real financial harm, $15,000 in earnest money, potentially more." He let that sit. "Now, we can resolve this today, cleanly, if you'll authorize the parcel sale and reinstate your contribution. Or we proceed with the petition to remove you as trustee. And frankly, Renata, that's not a fight you want." Diane nodded along like a metronome. Kyle smirked. The bank officer looked down at his hands. The seller's agent watched everything with the flat patience of someone billing by the hour. The document in front of me was the same sale agreement from the pot roast dinner. Signature line still empty. Still waiting. I'd have bet on a polished nail. Warren folded his hands on his folder and waited for me to be afraid. The fan ticked overhead. Diane's nail found the edge of the table and began a slow, impatient tap, the same rhythm she'd tapped on the signature line at dinner, like she was already counting the money. I want you to picture it. The whole room tilted toward me. All that pressure, all those eyes, and the easiest thing on earth would have been to pick up the pen and make it stop. A month ago, I might have. But I had a letter in my pocket from a woman who'd seen this exact morning coming 4 years before it arrived. So I didn't reach for the pen. I reached for my own folder, the clean one, and I set it on the table and opened it slowly. I'm not going to authorize the sale today, I said. My voice came out level, almost soft, and I watched Warren lean in slightly because soft made him think I was caving. And I think before anyone files anything, we should all be looking at the same facts. So let's. I laid the first page where the bank officer and the seller's agent could both see it. This is my mother's trust. I'm the trustee. It requires an appraisal and notice before any sale of this land. I ordered the appraisal. I gave the notice. I haven't sold, and I haven't refused to sell. I've declined to skip the steps the document requires. That's not a breach. That's the job. I laid down the second page. This is the $60,000. It was my personal money, a gift I offered and had not yet made. I withdrew it in writing on the morning of the 16th, before any closing, before any of it was committed on paper. I looked up at Warren and kept my voice exactly where it was. You can't interfere with a sale by keeping your own money in your own account, Warren. You know that. You went to law school. Patrice spoke once, quiet and dry. A trustee following the trust instrument, and a private citizen declining to make a gift, are both acting entirely within their rights. There is no cause for removal here. They can file if they want to spend the money, but a court would have a hard time finding any reason to act on it. The bank officer was nodding before he caught himself. The seller's agent had stopped taking notes and was just listening. I turned the last page toward the center of the table, where everyone could see it. Here's the actual serious problem, I said. Somebody signed a purchase contract for $240,000, spending money that wasn't his and that nobody ever committed in writing. When that money didn't appear, the contract was always going to collapse. That's not something I did to you. I let it land, gentle as setting down a full cup. That's something you did to yourselves, and then drove 12 miles into town to blame on me. Warren's face had gone the dark red of a man whose closing argument just got entered as the other side's exhibit. He opened his mouth. Diane got there first. She stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. You ungrateful little, she caught herself, but only halfway. Her face had come apart. All that smooth, gone. The words came out shaking. Your father gave up everything for you. He raised you. And the second he needs you, you slam the door and hide behind your dead mother and your paperwork. She slapped her hand flat on the table, hard enough to rattle the mints. Your mother is dead, Renata. She's dead. This is our family now, and you are not going to ruin it. There it was, the third time she'd said that line to me, and the loudest and the last. The room had gone dead silent around her. The bank officer was very still. The seller's agent had her pen frozen above the page. My father finally looked up at me, and I held his eyes, not Diane's, when I answered. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I think that's what made the room turn. That she was on her feet shaking, and I was sitting still. "You're right," I said. "My mother's gone." "I know. I was there. A beat. That's exactly why her trust answers to me and not to you. She wrote it that way on purpose, while she was alive, in her own words, because she knew this day was coming." Diane's mouth worked, but nothing came out. I turned then to my dad, and I kept my voice as low as a hand on a shoulder, because what I had to say to him, I'd waited 2.5 years to be allowed to say. "You left me a voicemail," I said. "You told me I was out. You said move on without me." I let the next part come gently, which is the only way the truth like that should ever come. "So I did, Dad. I moved on first. You can't put your family out at 6 in the morning and still own her at 10. He didn't have an answer. "There isn't one." Kyle had stopped smirking somewhere in the last minute and was staring at his shoes. Diane stood there in her red blazer with one hand still on the table, breathing hard, finally understanding she'd been the loudest person in a room she'd already lost. I gave them the way out one more time, on the record, in front of every witness Warren had so helpfully gathered. I think that surprised them more than anything. "Here's where we are," I said, and I slid my written offer to the center of the table, the same one they'd already turned down once. "I'll consider a proper appraised partial sale of the back acreage, handled through the trust the way Mom required. The home place and the oak stay. Some of those proceeds can go towards suitable housing for my dad, because that's actually within my authority when it's done right. All I'm asking is a real appraisal, no rushing, and that the talk about me not being family stops today." I looked around the table. "That's the same offer I made last week. It's fair. It's probably more than you'd get from a judge. Take it, and we all go home lighter." The room waited. The bank officer actually leaned forward. For one breath, I thought my dad might reach for it. Then Diane, who could not let me be the reasonable one, said tight and low, "We're not taking conditions from her." And my father, given the chance to choose his daughter over his pride one more time, looked down at the table and said nothing, which was its own kind of choosing. So the deal was dead. The $15,000 was gone. The Birch Street house would belong to the backup buyers by Friday. They'd done all of that to themselves, in this room, with witnesses, after I'd handed them a rope twice. Warren shuffled his pages, his big folder suddenly just paper. If they filed to remove me now, they'd be filing on nothing, and they knew it, with 2 neutral witnesses sitting right there. I gathered my file slowly and neatly and tapped it square on the table. I stood. I didn't slam anything. Didn't gloat. Didn't say a word about winning, because I hadn't come to win. At the door, I turned just once and looked at the people who'd told me I was out. I gave them the same word I'd given them that morning in the truck, the one they'd thought meant I was beaten. "Okay," I said. And I left. The parking lot was bright after that dim room, the kind of clean spring light that makes everything look freshly washed. Patrice came out behind me, pulling on her gloves, and she didn't say anything for a second, which from Patrice is a compliment. Then she said, "Your mother would have liked that." I got into my truck, the same cab where I'd heard the voicemail a month before, and I sat there a moment with my hands on the wheel and the letter still in my pocket. I waited to feel sad. Some of it came. Sure, you don't watch your father pick his pride over you and feel nothing. But mostly what I felt was light, all the way down. The way you feel when you finally set down a thing you've carried so long you forgot it had weight. Then I drove back to town, to my shop, to the work that had never once told me I wasn't family. Here's how it shook out, in the plain numbers I trust more than feelings. The Birch Street deal collapsed. My father and Diane lost their $15,000 in earnest money and got a bill from the seller's lawyer on top of it. The house in town never happened. Warren talked them out of the petition to remove me once he'd had a few days to think. There was no cause to put in it, and he knew that better than anyone. The 160 acres, the farmhouse, and my mother's row of oaks are still whole, still in the trust, still doing exactly what she wanted them to do. My father still lives in that farmhouse, by the way. The trust provides for him, and I never touched that, because being fair to him was always part of the job, even the morning he forgot to be fair to me. Diane and Kyle moved out by the end of summer. I heard the marriage didn't survive a winter without the new house she'd been promised. Turns out some people only stay for the porch. Aunt Louise still brings me casseroles I don't need and stories I do. The Methodist ladies came back around, mostly, the way small towns do once the truth has had a season to settle. My dad and I talk now and then, short calls, on my terms, with the door open just a crack. It isn't what it was. It may never be. But I sleep through the night and my books balance. And the land my mother trusted me to keep is going to be there for whoever needs it next. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from all of this, it's that when someone mistakes your calm for weakness, you don't have to correct them out loud. Calm is just what strength looks like once it's already decided. That's my story. One voicemail. One word back. And a piece of land my mother trusted me to keep whole. If this reminded you that holding a boundary isn't cruelty, it's care with a spine, then take that as your sign. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.